Thanks so much for everyone here today. Thanks so much for joining us for our first launch of the Information Dive, formerly known as iDive. Our goal is to bridge the knowledge gap between students and industry professionals by engaging in some meaningful conversations with you all here today. Our questions come from students seeking to learn more about how to make that transition from post-grad as seamless as possible. Today, we have 3 guests from the UX industry: Christina, a UX designer and writer from IBM, Aditi, a UX researcher from Google, and Danielle, a UX research manager from WealthSimple. We kindly ask for your support, and we kindly say thank you so much for your time today in helping our students learn from your stories. This episode is going to be the first one of our 2-part special all about UX. And with a warm welcome, could I ask you guys to give a brief intro about yourselves? We'll start off with Aditi.
Hi, everyone. As Roshni mentioned, I'm Aditi, and I'm a UX researcher at Google. I've been working at Google for now a little over 3.5 years, and graduated from the iSchool in 2017.
Awesome. Welcome, Aditi. And Christina, would you like to go next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina. I currently work at IBM as a UX writer and UX designer. I graduated from iSchool last year in 2019. I worked as a UX researcher prior to my current role, also within IBM, focusing on the AI space. Right now, I focus on compilation technology.
Awesome. Excited to learn from you here today. And Danielle, take the lead for the last round.
Yeah. Hello. I'm so glad to be here. I'm Danielle. I am a UX research manager at WealthSimple. I've been at WealthSimple for a little over 2 years now, and I graduated from the iSchool in 2017 with Aditi. Really glad to be here.
Awesome. From what I've heard, you guys were one of the first rounds of the new UX program back then, so it's nice to see the evolution and have Christina's perspective here from our last year's cohort. So I guess I'll start off with what kind of work are you guys responsible for in your current role? If anyone wants to chime in, start it off.
I can start us off. So my role has evolved a lot in my time at WealthSimple. So when I first started, I started as a designer, which is a long story, and then transitioned into a research role. And as the first researcher at WealthSimple, my role was really just doing a lot of research and kind of building up that credibility and building the practice of research. Since then, now that I'm working as a manager, my role has focused a lot more on hiring amazing researchers to do amazing research in lots of areas of the company, and kind of advocating for research to leadership. So my role has actually changed a lot. And lately my day-to-day is a lot more, sitting in meetings, talking to leaders and trying to ensure that decisions that are being made with research in mind. So yeah, it's been a ride.
I can go next. So I'm a UX researcher, so I really focus on the research side of things when it comes to doing work at Google. So that means conducting anything from like usability studies to like surveys to more foundational research. And I think what the interesting thing is, also thinking about my time here, it's also being a researcher has kind of changed over the last couple of years. So when I first joined, it was very like tactical research. So I was doing a lot of like usability studies on upcoming features and products, really testing that out, making sure that's ready for launch. And over my time, I've now moved more to doing a balance of both tactical, but also strategic research. So that's really focused on being like forward thinking about, hey, like next year, what are some of the ideas or opportunities we should be focusing on? So kind of leveraging the strategic side of UX research. And similar to Danielle's path, it's like really over here the thing is, how do we get like leadership and stakeholders to buy into these like bigger strategic research that takes more time and just needs more investment and buy-in from the whole team to really commit to acting on any of those findings, which is a ongoing lesson that an experience that I'm trying to fine-tune.
Lovely. Awesome. I loved hearing how you've gone from that advocacy perspective and really kind of honed and refined that throughout your research. So thanks so much for sharing. Christina?
Yeah, for me as well, I've explored in various design disciplines within IBM in my past year. I've done some research as well as some design, and in my most recent role, working more with content. So we do still apply our UX research, talking to users But my output, the work that I do, is more in the space of helping people use our products and services, and it comes in a text or video format. So doing video work, explaining how people will come to search for certain services or products, how they go about to use different technology that we offer. So a lot of writing and research, understanding the research, working with our researcher on the team, as well as, and I think the big role is also mentoring other people beyond designers. So we do have a lot of developers that I'm currently helping to teach the design thinking as they join this company, to learn to work together with this diverse people in diverse roles.
It's really interesting to see how you guys come from very different spaces, all within the UX industry, but you bring such different roles and experiences. And then there's some overlap in between as well with the advocacy for your user. So awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, guys. I'll transition to our next question. Reflecting on your own interview experiences, what questions should students expect in a UX interview? Because I know, Danielle, you mentioned that now you're hiring UX researchers. How should one approach a UX interview?
Yeah, I get this question a lot for sure, and I'm sure everybody has perspectives on this one. I think every interview is going to be different. The thing that like people are always looking for is that like there's a few things that really stand out. So one is like really strong communication and storytelling, you know, coming in with your portfolio and with your kind of ability to really show us your passion for research or design or whichever UX discipline you're really focused on, and to have a really strong reflective kind of mindset where you are able to look back on your work and say what you might have done differently, share the experiences, collaborating with folks from different types of roles, and to reflect on those experiences. Like it really, really helps. So I think just really knowing your stories back and forth is really, really important when you come into an interview. Yeah. Those are some things that stand out to me, just having those stories ready to go.
Awesome.
I can share a couple of insights on that as well, because I do conduct UX interviews as well. I think the big thing that when we're doing interviews is what we're really trying to do is understand how you think, and really understand that process of like, and every startup interview, I'm like, okay, the answer can be anything, but what I'm really interested in is how have you arrived at that? Because I think the biggest thing is we understand, tools will change, there'll be new methods that come out, but what we're really interested in is understanding how do you approach a problem? How do you work with other people to figure out what, the best solution is? That's actually a big thing that we look out for is, how have you collaborated with other team members before? And especially if anyone coming from like academia, really understanding, like, have you worked with a group before? Have you gone through those dynamics of like, how do you handle a difficult team or stakeholder? That's something that we'll have like a set of like these hypothetical questions that we'll ask you. Is like the other big one that comes up often is like, if you're presenting, especially for researchers, you're presenting your research, but someone on the team doesn't believe or buy into your research, how do you defend that? Because I think that's a big thing that we look for is like, do you understand one, like the core research methods and understanding, like, oh, only 2 users said this. Is this an actual problem, but being able to defend that. And then the second thing I would want to caution students is when we get, this is once again, maybe more so specific for researcher, is people who brand themselves as mixed methods, as doing both quant and qual, to then be expected to get follow-up questions on really digging into, do you really understand like quant methods and qual methods? Because at Google, you can be a qualitative researcher or a quantitative researcher. And even when it comes to the quant side, people will want to dig into like, do you understand, these different survey methodologies? So I think I always caution people of, do what feels like authentic to you, but don't try to brand yourself as being like the jack of all trades. Yeah, I think that those are the top things that come to my mind.
Yeah, I also echo a lot of it when you said, talking about why you did what you did, and talking about if there was any pushbacks, what were your steps to approach that? Because, as a designer, you come up with a solution that you think is best for your users or presenting your users, but it's not always taken. So how do you communicate the decisions you come through your research and your designs? I think as well, I think there's a misunderstanding when I talk to people a lot around tooling. People emphasize different tools that they use, but ultimately, I don't think there's a huge focus on how many tools you are expert in. It's really about that you are open to learning and you are using those tools to do something, and you're leveraging those features in those tools to achieve something. So communicating those comes before talking about all these prototyping tools that you're familiar with and different things that you played around with.
Can I build on that? When you guys say communication is really key, how do you communicate? Like, what is a way to communicate the best way? Anyone want to answer that?
I think it's a few things, like coming with like a presentation. If you're gonna do a presentation, which it's not necessarily necessary, but if you're gonna do it, that presentation should be should reflect your presentation skills, right? Like it should be concise. It shouldn't have, slides that are covered in text or grainy images, which are, things that actually do come up quite a bit. And so I think just being really mindful, if you think like a UXer in coming into the interview, what are we looking to learn about you? And I think Aditi and Christina did such a great job of articulating that. We are kind of looking to understand the way you think, like Aditi said. And so kind of thinking about us and what we're looking for and crafting your story around that. And whether that's using a presentation or actually showing something physical, although I realize as I say this, in-person interviews feel like a thing of the past, but something could have happened in the past, maybe down the road. But yeah, I think just really thinking about who is your audience, right? And what are they trying to learn? Who are your interviewers and what do they want to know about you? If you can look them up in advance and kind of see what they might be interested in, and then tailoring your presentation, that's what UX is all about, right? Is knowing your audience and designing for them. So I think there's not unfortunately a perfect, this will work every time you do it, silver bullet option for how you communicate your story. But if you have us in mind and you design kind of your presentation, your storytelling for the audience in the room and adjust and adapt as you're in the room, I think that's really what we're kind of looking to see.
And I wanted to add on to that. The way I've also thought about communications is essentially in two ways when it comes to interviews. It's one is kind of what Danielle's mentioned is how are you communicating with the interviewers and with the panel? So that's kind of this meta, just observing how are you answering or responding to our questions, and or either asking us questions or just that, what that interaction is like. And then specifically when it comes to depending on your discipline, I can speak from the research side, how do you think about communicating your research insights? Because as we kind of mentioned, kind of as you progress as a UX professional, so much of it is getting your team members to buy in. So that can be from, once again, at the core of it, it's considering your audiences. So it's walking us through, how do you prepare a research report? How do you decide if you only have 10 minutes to share your research insights, what will you focus on and why? And then it can be as much as, how do you persuade someone who doesn't believe in, UX or UX research and really convince them? So it can be all these kind of aspects of communication that we look for, and it's specifically thinking about deliverables and how do you approach creating a deliverable depending on what that context is. Are you considering all these different criteria? Once again, at the core of it, we're just looking to see how you think about this, right? When you're given a situation or a problem, how do you go about thinking what's the best communication method to approach it?
Yeah, I feel there's no right or the best way in general. It really depends on how you position yourself, whether you are a researcher or you're UX designer or you are working in a smaller company where they're looking for, for you to cover the end-to-end whole design experience. So you really have to understand what they're looking for and I think it also comes with the practice, how much do you share? You don't want to overshare. They lose interest, but you also don't want to undershare because it's their first time seeing your project. They don't know what you worked on. So I think, as you go to these different interviews, talk to different people, they'll give you feedback and then you reflect on that and improve on it. I think that's the way to go to prepare for these interviews and how to talk about your work and how to put your portfolio representation together.
I love that I just got insights from someone who's been in the industry for 4 years and someone who has been working for a year, and just seeing the transition over the last few years. So thank you so much, guys. I'm going to kind of like segue into, imagine now you have your job, your UX career. How do you grow your career in UX? How do you get into that space? Like, what are the opportunities for growth? Is it horizontal? Is it vertical? Is there something about the career that you know now that you wish you knew earlier?
This is a really tough one. And I think for someone who's just starting off, working at such a big company, it takes time to navigate and understand what the career growth is like. But I think one key word that we talk about is eminence, kind of becoming an expert and becoming the person that people can go to for particular knowledge or expertise. So I think that's something that I've been thinking about how I can grow my eminence, my presence in my team, as well as a larger organization. What is my core skills that I can further elaborate on to become that expert?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And like, I think one way that we talk about growth in careers at WealthSimple that I find really helpful is to say something like, your career isn't a ladder, it's a jungle gym, and you might move up, down, to the side, diagonally, like all different sorts of ways in that process. And I think especially in UX, there's so much opportunity when it comes to career growth, and you kind of want to like be open to that. So there's, the standard path of like, I'm going to go like intermediate, senior, whatever my discipline is, and then try and become a manager and go into leadership. There's also like individual contributor paths that speak more to that eminence piece that Christina's talking about, where it's all about really becoming an expert in your craft and maybe become like a staff or a principal. And then there's also like, I think this is something super exciting about UX, is because we kind of develop this really diverse toolkit where like, I think a really strong UXer can flex into being a product manager. They can flex into being a designer, even if their title is researcher, or a UX writer, even if their title is designer. And you might find that, your interest actually lies in switching up your discipline and seeing how that feels, or switching into product management. So there's so many different paths to growth. And when I talk to folks who are breaking into UX, one thing I say is like, you've kind of, I think to break in, you kind of need to pick a lane. But once you get in, there are so many paths to growth, and there's so many different opportunities. And I think the best way as you're starting your career to think about growth is just try a lot of things. Don't hesitate if you're a researcher to pair with a designer and really get your hands dirty doing that work. And so too for a researcher to try, to work on the content strategy, like try different things and see what you're interested in. And you might find that your growth path goes in all sorts of different directions. And this is speaking as someone who came into the industry as a designer, switched into research, right? So I really had that experience of starting as a designer and then learning I actually love research, and over time just realizing this is where I'm going to move. So that was kind of a lateral move from product designer to UX researcher, but it was a really important move for my career, and one that was really, really exciting.
So Roshni, actually what I would love to do is answer that last question you had about, what's something I wish I knew when I was starting off my career. And bear with me as I maybe go into a personal space, but it's how to best tackle like imposter syndrome. I think this is something that was especially very present when I first started at Google, but it hasn't ever really gone away. It's always kind of persisting there of like, am I the best person to do this or not? But I think the best advice I ever got was, especially early when you're starting off in your career, treat everything as like a learning experiment, and just like lean into that of like, hey, I'm starting this out. It might not be perfect, but I'll have like things that I learned from this and kind of go from there. And I think even now when I think about growing my career,
I feel like sometimes as you become more senior, you tend to take like less risks because you don't want to seem as like a novice in a specific like domain or field. But I think it's really important, or has been really important for me to remember, kind of keep that like experimental mindset of like, even if this is something new and I haven't done before, we'll see how this goes. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But at least we tried it, and we won't have any FOMO for not doing that. But I feel like I wish someone had told me about, how do you best wrangle the beast that is imposter syndrome early and even now.
Interesting you bring that up, because we just had a lecture on that in class about 2 days ago about imposter syndrome. So they are bringing it to the classrooms now, which is really nice. I guess
I have something to add to something that I wished I knew. I think it was something that when I started, I thought a lot about, and I think it's on the same line, things that I'm missing, skills that I'm lacking, what do I need to work further on? For me, it was like not having technical background, technical knowledge. I felt like there's a lot of gap in that. But I was really surprised once I started how open they were for you to learn something on the job. They're looking for someone who can look for opportunities, identify opportunities, and create those opportunities. So rather than being a person who's waiting for work to be assigned, even as an early career person, you can find ways that you can create projects that aligns with your interests. So it's not always about what's on the job description. You can create your own career path, and you can explore into different spaces, acquire different design skills along the way.
I want to thank you both for sharing imposter syndrome and how you've gravitated and worked with that, because I know that I'm going to face that soon enough, and I know a lot of students are going to face that along the way. But what you guys were saying about your skills and having to learn as you went into this career field, and just always seeing everything as a learning opportunity, are there any skills or fundamental softwares or anything you would recommend to someone who's just new to the space, going on to start their career? How can they learn right off the bat before they start their career?
So for UX, for researchers, I'll speak to specifically. I think this is true across disciplines, is that tools change a lot, and whenever the newest tool comes around, it feels like this tool is going to be the tool and we're going to use it forever. But then here comes another tool. So I'm hesitant to suggest tools, but I think there's fundamental skills that it never hurts to work on. And some of the skills that I think people don't work on enough are interviewing is a huge one. I think, as a researcher, the number one thing you're going to be doing is interviewing. Designers should also have that skill of interviewing, managing rapport in a conversation, and how to gather insights in conversation. So I think interviewing is a huge skill that I recommend practicing a lot. Interview your peers and practice. Notice when you're asking leading questions. The sooner you start doing that work of noticing and becoming a mindful interviewer, the better it is for your craft. And another big one for research that I would recommend people work on early in their career is synthesis. It's another really, really tough skill that's it takes a lot of time to kind of develop that craft of taking your raw data and turning it into insight. And the more you can kind of practice and try out different ways of synthesis and just practice those two skills, interviewing and synthesis, you'll whether you're a designer, researcher, or UX writer, those are going to be really fundamental skills that will be really relevant and applicable no matter what tools we're using in a few years.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of plus one to what Danielle said. The synthesis one, I think, is the one that stands out to me a lot, especially when you first, at least when I reflecting on some of my experiences, when I first, was doing UX research professionally, it just took me more time just because I had less practice. But in industry, timelines are very short. There's a very high expectation that you turn things around very quickly. And part of that just comes with time and experience when you know how to do synthesis more efficiently, but then also understanding what's most top of mind for your team, and like knowing how to like pick out what are the most important nuggets versus trying to do, you know, everything at once. And then I think on top of that, I think an important skill, especially for research, is writing your reports and how to use succinctly, you know, condense to the most, at least my research report styles, like snappy, quick to the point, try to eliminate any superfluous words, because either I could be presenting my research report where, you know, I want people to focus on what I'm saying, but I could also be sending it as a standalone, so it needs to be able to, you know, speak for itself. So I think writing is also a really crucial skill.
Awesome. I see a common theme kind of among your research where it's all about having confidence in your research and having that ability to kind of have that succinct voice to advocate for it, but also know that the information you're pulling out is the most important that you're sharing. So thanks for sharing that. I'm excited to hear what Christina has to say about this question as well.
I guess a lot of it has been said. I've also worked in a research role, so I can really also plus one on a lot of what's been said. I think something for me to add on is, it's not really, again, specific to any tool, but for me, it's learning how to work in a cross-discipline team. I think when we go to iSchool and we do a lot of group projects together, we're working with other designers who really has same passion and understanding and motivation. But then when you work in the industry, you might be the only designer on that particular product, or designers are not heavy loaded in each project. So learning to speak the language of people who you work with, and also advocating for your own role, why you're there and why your role is critical in this project. Articulating that and learning how to kind of hold your position is something that I think to be kept in mind. And I think within iSchool, there are opportunities to do this. Something that I've done was to take courses outside of the iSchool. I took a course in engineering where I was working with two engineers, and they don't know anything about design thinking or design process. So, you know, teaching them how design comes into play, and me learning what they're talking about, and really saying, I don't really understand what you're talking about. Can you explain that? To, you know, not being ashamed of the fact that you don't know, but being confident to ask is something that you can just keep in mind and think about when you are studying and looking for industry opportunities. Or even, like, you know, you can do it in volunteer opportunities as well. When you go offer design services, you might be the only designer. They might not know, they say they want designers, but then they don't really know what you do. So building that role, defining your own role, and drawing lines as to what you can do and what you can't do is something they can practice.
I'm going to kind of build on what you guys are saying about practicing advocating for your work. How do you advocate for your work? Like, if you get pushback from your stakeholders, someone's telling you, like, no, I don't agree with this, how do you say that I have facts to back it up?
I think this kind of comes back to the imposter syndrome piece a lot. So my first piece of advice is don't panic. I think that's like a lot of the time the reaction is just like, when you have that imposter syndrome perspective, when someone says, like, you know, I don't believe you, or like, prove it more, or whatever that feedback is, there's kind of immediate reaction of like fight or flight, of like, oh God, they like see me as the imposter I am. And I think just remembering and like ground yourself and remind yourself that you're an expert. You're here for a reason. Your work matters. Your expertise matters. So I think, first off, don't panic and kind of remember who you are, and remember that you deserve to be where you are. And then the second piece is like, just coming back to, I think Aditi has spoken really well to this today. It's really about knowing your stakeholder. Like, how do they think, and what's going to feel valid to them? So, you know, a lot of times, like, a really, really common scenario is they're looking at qualitative research when they only really know how to understand quantitative research. And so they're saying, like, how do I, like, this is only two people, or whatever that kind of common refrain is. And I think to that person, you kind of have a few options. You can try to educate them about qualitative research and explain why that insight is valid in spite of the like seemingly low sample size. Or you can try to find some quant data to back it up. Like one of the benefits of coming from the iSchool is how to read an academic paper. And so you can find some secondary research or just do some Googling and see if anybody else has done something similar that you can pull in. And every stakeholder is going to kind of have a different perspective. So just kind of know who your stakeholder is and find a way to speak their language. I would also say, there's a great book called Just Enough Research by Erica Hall, which you might have already heard of. And she has a whole chapter on like common sort of misconceptions about research and how to respond to them. I return to that a lot in these conversations, and I often will pull out sort of quotes from that. So that's a great handy resource to have in mind as well in these scenarios, but they'll come up all the time. And, don't panic, but you can always buy yourself time. You never have to give an answer in the moment. You can always say, let me get back to you on that. And just remember, like, you're smart, your insights are valid. Be open to framing them differently for your stakeholders so that you can get them on board, because ultimately that's the goal at the end of the day.
Yeah, I feel like Danielle captured most of the stuff that I was going to say. Yeah, imposter syndrome is like the first like initial reaction that I want to go to. But I remember a lead told me this is like, just remind yourself, especially if you're a researcher, out of anyone in the room, you've probably spoken to the most users. So yes, you might be talking about one specific study, but it's so easy to like leverage, hey, this is a trend that we've seen time over time. And the other way that I try to do it, especially if like an insight I'm presenting is, usability, some user missed it, I try to essentially call out what the risk is for not addressing it, even if it was one participant. If like one participant can't do this, what if this is a really critical user journey for a whole product? We would lose them at this point. So I think that has sometimes worked well. It's like essentially scaring your team members of like, when you miss this is going to be critical for our product. I find that fear sometimes works well into persuading people. And then the other side of when on the topic of like advocating for your work, I think this is something that I also wish I knew earlier is, and I think this also ties into like interviewing and some of the other topics, is like, how do you even talk about your work? Like, even though like I have a job, I'm on a team, I realize that there's still a lot of this extra work of like, I still need to talk about, and I need to know how to talk about my accomplishment. This comes up in like your performance reviews, and in terms for, do people on the team like know your work and how it's impacted product? And that's something I learned early in my career, is that I had a manager being like, you will always be the best advocate for your work. It will never be like your manager or your boss. So you really need to own that responsibility. And the one book that's helped me out, I might not completely remember the correct title, but it's called The Art of Bragging, How to Toot Your Own Horn, by Peggy Klaus. And it's a really great book about, how do you brag about yourself in a way that doesn't feel like uncomfortable, because it can be so uncomfortable to talk about your accomplishments. And what her key message is, like, find she calls them like your brag bites. Like, what are those stories? Like, try to create a story around this accomplishment. So it's not just like, I did X, Y, and Z, but it could be like, hey, like there was this problem, and then I conducted this research that uncovered this, and the team acted on this. So really having those snappy bites, because something we used to talk about back in the day when we're in the office is that if you're in like, if you have like the vice president of your team in line for coffee, if you have like 1 or 2 minutes to like pitch what you're working on, like what would you say to them? Like, you should always, and especially at Google, you always have these opportunities where really senior folks can be like roaming around you. How would you leverage that moment to advocate for like UX, your work, and then also kind of make an impression on them? So constantly, I think thinking about like how you talk about your accomplishment is something that I think it becomes is super important.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Christina, I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
I don't have too much to add, but I think something to keep in mind is that you're there because you're bringing different perspectives. So you don't have to feel like you have to agree with everyone else. You're a designer, you talk to different people, you came up with your design solution. because you're bringing this fresh perspective. So not being afraid of not being accepted at once, and being more confident in what you have is grounded in research, grounded in the study that you did. And ultimately, as a UX practice, it's not the final destination. You're open to iterating and improving. So knowing that given time frame, you have the solution that you feel confident is best for given problem, let's test it. So keeping that in mind and just being confident, fighting that imposter syndrome.
What I'm hearing from all of you guys is kind of having a confidence in yourself is really important as well throughout this. So really knowing like yourself, knowing like what you're capable of and knowing how to tell everyone, you know what, I can do this and I'm going to make this happen. So awesome. Good to know. I got some strong women, inspiring mentors in the field. So thank you for that. You're kind of going into my next question and answering them for me. So what books would you recommend or podcasts for people to go into the field of UX?
Yeah, I mean, Just Enough Research by Erica Hall is like fantastic. Always going to recommend that book. I think there are a lot of I actually find when it comes to podcasts, I have in the past listened to design and research podcasts. There definitely are some great ones out there. But I think just listening to things that are sort of adjacent but really interesting. So one that I like to recommend for UXers is called The Happiness Lab. And it is a podcast that's not about UX research. It's more so about academic research and about kind of human behavior and what makes people happy. And I think it's a really, really great podcast for researchers to listen to kind of think about human behavior in a different way. And I kind of like with my podcast to go to listen to things that are a little bit outside the UX space and kind of expand my mind. Some other great books I've read recently, Cross-Cultural Design by Sanongo Akpem is an excellent book I just read with the WealthSimple UX Book Club. It was really, really great. Highly recommend that one. If you are someone starting out and you just really want to dive deep on what method should I use in different scenarios as a researcher, I always recommend Validating Product Ideas by Tomer Sharon. I think that's a really good sort of just Bible to have around as especially early in your career, or if you're someone who's not a researcher but wants to do research in your work. Those are some that come to mind for me. Would love, I'm excited for these recommendations from the others still.
I almost feel like I see Aditi on the side writing these down, being I want to read these.
It's true. I feel like I know Danielle's really well read, so I knew she would have a ton of recommendations. I was actually trying to look up one that someone recommended when I first joined. It's called The Universal Methods of Design. It has a purple cover, and essentially it just lists out once again both design sprint kind of methods and also research methods. And then the other one, maybe this is obvious, but the sprint book that came out, I forget what it's called, the design sprint book, the people who created design sprint. I think that's always a good one to leverage, because I think what they kind of tackle is how do you facilitate some of the design thinking with cross-functional folks, because I see that as a important skill and role of to get people bought into UX and the discipline is how do you facilitate an effective brainstorming. And I feel this is something that actually has come up a lot now, and this the virtual meeting age of how do you conduct these sprints virtually, which is very difficult when it relies so much of being in person and having those kind of discussions. And I know this is a classic and it must be part of your curriculum, but The Design of Everyday Things I think was also a great book to kind of have for inspiration.
For me, my go-to is actually blogs. I enjoy reading short blogs in the times that I have. So we do have, Medium articles are great. I have a lot of coworkers and friends. And as a business, we also publish articles. So I like to get those information, how, it's casually written, easy to consume, UX Collective as well. Book-wise, I think this one I read in Colin's class, and I actually really enjoyed it. It's called Quiet, talking about the power of being introverts. as an introvert myself, I really resonated with a lot of the perspectives that's been brought. A book that I'm currently reading is Ruined by Design. I'm still going through that, but yeah, that's my recommendations.
Awesome, guys. We're just about to wrap up. I think we'll have about 2 to 3 questions left. So let me ask you something that all of our students want to know. What do they put in their portfolio? We know these books. We're going to put them in. We're going to say that we like to read them. And then we're going to tell you about our insights and our research methods from them. What else do we put in our portfolios?
So I think, like, again, there's not like a perfect answer, unfortunately. I just would say, I'll give a few tips. First of all, put some of your personality into your portfolio. You know, like, we want to know who you are. You know, if you have a hobby, or like what makes you different, what makes you, you know, a human. Like, these are things that we're genuinely really interested in that can really stand out on a portfolio. So like, inject some of that personality into your portfolio for sure, especially if, you know, that's the first thing the hiring manager is going to see when they are learning about you. You know, catching their eye really helps. Be really mindful about what you do and don't put in. Like, a common mistake I see with portfolios is just like way too much information. Like, I do not need to see every single screen that you know, tested in your usability test, or every single post-it note that you did in your synthesis, right? So I think just like edit your portfolio really thoughtfully. Like, this is a really key moment in showing your communication skill is your portfolio. So really concise. What was the problem? How did you approach it? What was the methods that you used? Why did you choose those? Who did you talk to? What happened when you did? What did you learn? And then what was the impact is really key. Even if even if the impact, you know, wasn't what you had hoped, even if the impact was small, even if it was kind of a project where you had limited access to like analytics and really understanding the impact, just show that you thought about it and that you tried, right? I mean, especially when you're starting out, like, the ability to show that impact can be challenging if you're not in a company where, like, you know, there's a lot of focus on metrics and tracking that help you identify your impact. There's something you can show, and really just showing that you thought about the impact of your work and you thought about what would you do next, you know, if you could have continued the project. And then really critically, again, like, what would you do differently? Like, really want to see that you reflect on it, and that you have some thoughts on how you would have done things differently if you got another go at it, because I do not know a single UXer who hasn't completed a project and thought there's about 1,000 things I would have done differently if I'd had more time or had more resources or whatever it is. But the key thing is just, you know, treat it as it is an opportunity to showcase your communication skills. Edit, short, concise. Assume the hiring manager looking at it has a minute or two of you know, if you have very little of their time, make that message really, really clear, really, really fast. And if they only read the first 2 sections, you know, you want to make those first 2 sections shine. So just really think about, again, you know, who's your audience and design for them. You know, all the basic hits that need to be there. I don't, like Christina said earlier, I don't necessarily need to see the tools that you use. Like, those for a researcher might be different in different fields, but for a researcher, like, I'm less interested in, like, you know, a list of tools you used or a list of methods that you used in the past. I really want to see like the story of a project.
+1 too. I feel like Danielle like covered like pretty much all the feedback that I would share as well. I think the one thing I wanted to highlight on is like when it comes to content, once again, focus on the decisions you made and why did you choose this method, and like how did you arrive at that. And I think the one thing where you can show impact, especially with some of like your case studies, is you do research and then you iterate on it. So talking about that piece of like, hey, I used this because of this research insight, we changed the design in X way, because that is something that we will look for as impact. But we also understand that when we see, you know, a student's portfolio, we're not like evaluating it the same way we would expect someone who's been in the field for 5 years. So we know we understand that, hey, impact will look different based on, you know, who is applying. But if you can speak to that of like, you know, the understanding of, you know, how does, you know, whether depending on what your project has have impact or what impact do you expect, those are the key things to call out. And I think, yeah, +1 to being like, at most people are spending 2 minutes max, like that's also being pretty generous. So how can you make this like as scannable, as easy to consume, get the key information, and like being memorable? Because I think one part of like, you know, with the portfolio is like, can you spark curiosity for whoever's reviewing it to be like, oh, I want to invite this person and hear more. So, you know, how do you make your portfolio sticky? Actually, that's the one thinking about like a book that I would recommend is, I believe it's called Made to Stick, which is, I know storytelling is an important skill. I know attending some of Professor Olivier's classes, I know he focuses on that. Storytelling, communicating are all very important skills. And as Danielle called out, it's your first impression, and we get a sense of like, how are you communicating? Do you understand that you got to be concise? We get a sense of like your writing style and presentation style. That will be really important to get that right.
Yeah, there's just so many different ways to put your portfolio together, and there isn't an ultimate answer or one best practice. And the way you put together almost shows who you are. So I think that's what they're looking at. Some of the advice that I've received when I was creating my portfolio is to add more photos of you in action. I think it goes back to what Danielle was saying. They want to know who you are, not just your work. So that was one tip I got. I think something else to think about is not just projects itself, but also how to navigate your portfolio. What are you trying to show first? How are people going to go through those projects? And what are you highlighting? You know, they might have more time, so they might go through everything, but most often they are going to go to whatever stands out. So not just how the individual projects are displayed and how your design process is demonstrated, but also your portfolio itself is a UX project. You have to think about who's looking at it, I know information architecture, how you're going to label things, how you're going to have navigation in that. So there's all these different formats too. And even to this date, I also look at my portfolio and I question, should I keep that? Do I need to change it? So it's a continuous work in progress. But I also look at other people's portfolios to always learn what's trending, what's changing, what's everyone else doing, and just kind of follow the trends sometimes, or you know, show yourself to make you stand out from what everyone else is doing.
Someone who's been editing their portfolio for the last 3 months, thank you so much. And I'm sure so many students out there are going to listen to this, especially what you were talking about, Danielle, about those impact elements and how to kind of break it down. That is so helpful. So thank you so much. I really appreciate how you guys shaped that the UX portfolio is meant to really showcase yourself as a UX project. So that's just incredible. I am lost for words. I'm on our last question and I can't believe we're almost to the end. I'm going to ask you guys to imagine your first day at the UX program. If you could give yourself one piece of advice talking to that past you, what would you say to them?
I think that, first of all, just coming back really quickly on portfolios, I would just add that like you will 100% for sure be embarrassed of your portfolio like a year after you publish it. Like when I reflect on my portfolio leaving the iSchool now, I'm like, why were there so many projects and why were there so many words? And it's just like an inevitable part of being a UXer. So just be prepared to laugh at your portfolio in a year. It'll be a really fun time. I know Aditi has had the same experience. I do like laugh about it all the time. In terms of a lesson that I would have said to myself, I think really it comes back to the imposter syndrome. Like I was such a wreck at that point. And I think I was really, really scared about, you know, will I be able to get a job, and just feeling like I'm not technical enough. I can't possibly succeed in the technology industry. I'm not gonna be able to find a job, etc. Like just lacking that confidence. And you know, it's a lesson that I'm still learning every day, but it's just like, you know, I think just like knowing your worth, like, you know, you're smart, you're valuable, you are going to create impact. You do not need to be technical. You do not need to learn how to code. Being smart, being a critical thinker, being organized, you know, being insightful, being empathetic, like those skills are so valuable. If you kind of have that innately, like those are things that are really hard to learn. And so, you know, like you have something special to give to the world. You have a lot of worth, and like, you know, I think just believing in myself is the thing I would have told myself to do, and myself then would have laughed, and myself now still thinks it's corny, but it's really true. Like, I think that's really the key, and the thing that like I still am learning and working on is just like not having that doubt, because there's no need for it, right? Like, you've got something to offer to this industry, you're going to break in and you're going to do great.
I think the thing what I would tell myself if I was like starting off the iSchool again would be like, don't be afraid of failing. And I think this ties into like things I've mentioned about like imposter syndrome. Like, you're going to make mistakes along the way, and just coming to terms with that, but take it as a learning opportunity. And even as part of like this fear of failure is not can't be a perfectionist, because I remember even when I was like trying to create my portfolio, I was like, so I didn't want to show it to anyone until it was like completely perfect. But it's in that time you lose this opportunity to even show some of your scrappy work. I mean, this is like the fundamental of like UX. It's like, show your thing early, get feedback, and iterate. And so I try to bring that philosophy in as much into your work. And so even the iSchool, I would have said to like, try out for more, I don't know if hackathons are still a thing, but, sign up for those extracurricular activities. And I know with like the job searching process, it's so tough. And I know like I'm being there, gone through that. And I think it's in those moments, like really believing in yourself, remembering what your strengths are. And like something that I would try to do is like, take like any accomplishment that you have, like make sure that you're capturing it somewhere, so you can like go to that. And when, things get tough, at being like, hey, I was really proud of this assignment, or this was like someone gave me a really great compliment, so you have that kind of like things to remind yourself that, hey, no, you got this. But yeah, I think it just comes down to like, believe in yourself, even if you're starting off in this journey that's like brand new. Embrace the learning experience, and don't be afraid of making mistakes or failing.
Yeah, I feel like mine's very similar. I think going back in time when I was first studying UX, without not really knowing what it is, I wish I knew that UX field as a practice really appreciates interdisciplinary background and diversity. So I wish that I focused on, what I studied in undergrad, all my previous job experiences, and thinking about how that could be an asset to becoming a UX designer, rather than thinking about what I was missing and for me also was a technical background, tech domain knowledge, or not being familiar with the tech industry. I felt that I was really falling behind, but I had all these other qualities that I've built from my undergraduate degree and my previous volunteer and work experience that still makes you a highly skilled UX designer. So I wish I focused on those over kind of pulling myself down about what I didn't have and skills that I felt like I was lacking.
So what I'm kind of hearing from you guys is play to your strengths, know yourself well, and kick imposter syndrome in the butt. That's what I'm hearing. Okay. Well, we have just finished our last question for the evening. I wanted to thank you all so much for your insights. I'm sure many students, including myself, will find so much value in this knowledge that you shared here today. And I'm so grateful for you to just share your time here. And who knows, maybe you'll be back here one day too. So with that, I'm gonna end our last little question and our first podcast of the evening, and give you guys a warm note of appreciation to have a lovely Christmas holidays.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, a lot of great questions. I wish they had this when I was a student. a lot of my answers here.
I guess that's what you guys get from being the first round of our future. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.